Cheers, guys. Epix 911, welcome to the Sunday, May 28th, 2017 edition of VR News. Not going to be a long intro today, quick one, just talking about the comment section. Going to get to that. I'm just happy I'm able to get back to the daily news show. Lots of stuff still to do in this new house. I've got a huge honey-do list. So yeah, the comments, a few more days before I can get to those regularly, but I assure you I will. So with that said, let's jump into news, guys. Start with a VR game called Throttle Powah, spelt Powah, that Powah. So what this is a motorbike game. Where it differs is that it's in VR and each of your controller arms, hands, is a fork to a wheel. And depending on how you position your arms, hands, how you steer, farther in front of you, how fast you go, closer, braking, etc. Very cool. The game may end up being absolute crap. However, it really got me thinking about a lack of motorbike games in VR. Simulation-based mostly, that would be down my alley, but even action-based, there's just not a hell of a lot. And it got me thinking about classics like Excitebike. There was a game from what would be considered an indie company now, Commodore 64, called Kickstart from a company called Mastertronic. And love that game. Would love to see more racing sims. So I'm going to keep an eye on this game. Not expecting much. Looks kind of fun. Hopefully it lives up to it and surpasses my initial expectations because, like I said, it really got me thinking about what else could be, not necessarily the game itself. Next news story. Will Destination VR help or hurt the medium? It's an Upload VR article, and I'm going to spoil it right away and just say the author seems to feel it will hurt. And I'm going to take the opposite side of that and say, no, it won't. And the reason I don't think it will is if you look at the next closest thing, the actual golden age of the arcade, the home console market. What did arcades do to the home console market? They grew it. It was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy of doom. The more successful the arcades got, the more people were jonesing for that experience at home, and arcade machines were cost prohibitive. In 1980s, they were $1,500 to $2,500 each. With inflation, you're talking $5,000 to $8,000. So it's no wonder that the home console market took off, and while it wasn't the only factor in killing off arcades, it was a huge component. So fast forward to now with VR, no. And this is going to tie in directly to the next article. Remember that, one with statistics this point. I'll get back to it. But no, I think the inverse is true. The opposite argument, I think you could make for that here as well. But we'll touch on that again. Let's talk about the next article. This is that one, the statistics one, company called Canalys. And the headline reads, U.S. dominates world's VR market as Chinese consumers yawn. What the hell are they talking about? Well, let's find out. So in their statistics, which you always take for a grain of salt until you find out exactly where and how it was conducted, but they say U.S. consumers account for 40% of the global VR market. That comes as no surprise to me and likely to you guys as well. Number two, however, yeah, pretty damn surprising, and I bet you're not thinking it. In fact, write it down or say it to yourself or scream it to your loved ones so they think you're nuts in your room. Well, wait a second. All right. Number two, Japan. You probably thought China like me, or maybe you got Japan right. But yeah, Japan second with 14%. What a huge jump. And I know the majority of my viewers are from the US, but there's viewers from all over the world. And what's the reason for that? Well, let's talk about Japan first. 14%, I think, just should make us realize that it's still very small globally, right? They have made an impact in Japan. PlayStation has sold decent there, not as well as in the US, where That 40% stat, 60% of those are PlayStation VR. So you can see Rift and Vive, they got a long ways to go there. Third place is the one that you probably, like me, thought was second, and that's China with 11%. Now, I said we get back to that whole argument about whether it will hurt or hinder the market, right? The reason, once I thought about it, makes sense why China is so low. Yes, there's a huge VR market in China. Kiosks selling all kinds of Google Cardboard style units, right? But the majority of the buzz in China is coming from the arcades. And even if you had 1,000 arcades with an average of 6 each, that's only 6,000 VR HMDs in a country with 1.4 billion people. So that's what I'm getting out of those statistics, right, from the previous or from this article. And I think a lot of that has to do, just like when I talked about the arcades being cost prohibitive, even though the middle class is growing in China, it might not be where people want to put that disposable income, right? A unit, which, let's face it, even for us in the rest of the world, is considered pretty damn pricey. We need that to come down to really penetrate and, get that mass consumer adoption rate. So interesting. Have a look at that if you want to read more. They go into some other statistics. Those were the gist of it, though. Next news piece, touching the future, the importance of the physical realm in VR. We have talked to death about haptics and haptic feedback. What I like about this article on Upload VR is they get into how cool that would be, right? We're pretty much probably all on the same page that haptics is just going to get better and better. And eventually, it's going to be pretty damn awesome. And I love an example that this article brings up. There's more. You can read the full thing in the link in the description below. But they bring one example up of a Resident Evil style game. So you're playing with a buddy, spouse, partner, whoever. Co-op, right? You get to a junction. Your buddy frantically tapping you on your shoulder. You feel that. You react. Then something else, cold and strong, grabs around one of your ankles. And you look, and it's not your buddy. It's a monster. That would freak the crap out of me, out of Hugh. Whether you like horror or not, that would probably require some kind of health warning, right? I mean, if you don't have a good ticker, that could probably lead to strokes and heart attacks and all kinds of stress-induced things. So, but would it be cool? Hell yeah. That would be so cool. Can't wait. Interesting article. Again, they get into it a lot more. If you want to check that out, click on the link below. This next one I think is neat as well because we've talked about the potential for VR helping architects. Now we have a concrete example. It's a Dutch firm. They're called Mecanoo, and they've got a product out, an app called Archispace, and it allows architects to do exactly that. Build buildings in a virtual space. And the biggest advantage is the fact that they, for the first time, can accurately get a sense of the scope and the scale of the actual finished building. You could be standing in the concourse. Imagine a new stadium, right? Now an architect, or more importantly, their client, imagine you're building an arena for a hockey team. Visibility from seats is good. You don't want obstructions, and that's why a lot of people are ticked with that new, where the New York Islanders moved to. I think it's in Brooklyn, right? It has horrible visibility in spots. Well, with Archispace, you could prevent a lot of that before it actually gets built because you could try various seats and get a sense of, the visibility, the sight lines. I just think it's fantastic. And it's going to revolutionize architecture, maybe not this app specifically, but this ability. And again, why I am not worried in the slightest about the future of VR. Yes, the consumer market might be a bit slow, but once this tool gets out to these places, don't think for a second an architecture firm is suddenly going to throw their VR helmet away and, go back. That would be like, in my opinion, dropping Excel and going back to an actual general ledger. It's not going to happen. And I don't think it'll happen in VR. Very cool. Check that out. And this last news story, probably my favorite. Super controversial guy, Palmer Luckey, the first post-Facebook interview. And I talked about this just before I went on my cross-country epic voyage. Now we have all 3 parts up. And I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to bring up a couple of key points. And don't be fooled if you're reading this and you're not into anime, say, or cosplay. That's how it starts. Go to page 2 of part 1, and that stops, right? I kind of like that because it was neat to read that his first anime was Death Note. That happened to be my gateway anime as well. Like I said, late to the party, but it was a good one and appears to be the same for him. But let's talk about the VR questions that are interesting in this article. And there's a couple that I want to talk about. And the first one strengthens my hunch that his next project will be a VR startup. And the reason is he's asked, where does your passion for VR come from nowadays? And his response, a few years have passed since I founded Oculus. I now have more passion for VR than ever before. So certainly hasn't diminished. He's not working for anybody right now. He doesn't have to say that. So my opinion, it strengthens that. Do I have any evidence? Like I said the other day, hell no, just a strong hunch. And that seems to point in the same direction. But let's get to his other questions. So he's asked what he thinks will be the final form of VR. And his response, the final form will be a direct neural link, but that is still off in the very far future. I don't know if it will become reality in our lifetime. It's not that it is hard on a technological level. We just don't know if it is possible at all. And that's so true for predictions in general. You can predict away, and the deeper and farther you predict, the more like an idiot you could look when we actually get to that time. Because, as I said before, future advances happen in those areas we today are not wise enough to predict. One of my favorite quotes. All right, and the last question, probably my favorite. He's asked about the evolution of content, because he seems to think 2017 is going to be all about content, right? And the question ends, are there any interesting developments when it comes to pictures or CG? He talks about 360-degree movies, and I love this. He goes, they are interesting. But if you truly want to capture reality, you need to record depth information. We talked about this yesterday when we looked at the differences between 360 and VR. So he says you want to record depth information. In doing so, you will be able to actually move through the recording. Live streaming 360-degree video with depth is going to be revolutionary. Hell yeah, it will. It will radically change VR content. There's several companies developing this technology. Once it exists, it will be like recording memories. And that is just such a powerful statement. Now, you could go back and you could talk about Google Glasses, which made that same promise, right? Record all your memories for the future. But imagine being able to do it in this way with some unobtrusive, could still be glasses, but we're talking in the future. Recording. Now, there are people, and excuse the pun, they have absolute total recall. Perfect, almost perfect memory for the past. They can conjure up an image, from Christmas when they were 6 years old and describe the whole day. Most of us don't have that. We've got snippets, right? First drive I did across Canada, I was 5. I remember maybe 3 things from that entire trip. This type of technology, imagine that. Being able to dial up a memory and actually walk around in it. That would be so damn cool. All right, guys, that is it for the VR news today. Tomorrow, more. Hope you guys are had a pretty damn good weekend. Unfortunately, the week, well, for some of you, tomorrow is going to bring work. For the rest of us, not so. And I say that with much jesting, guys. As always, cheers.